The snow fell light that evening, drifting across the small frontier town as if the heavens themselves were reluctant to let the day end. Folks gathered at the chapel with lanterns in hand, their boots crunching on the frozen ground, eager to witness the union that had been whispered about for months. It was supposed to be the kind of wedding that settled feuds, strengthened families, and gave neighbors reason to believe in happy endings. The groom stood tall at the front, a man carved by hardship and long winters, his broad shoulders wrapped in a coat that had seen too many storms. His hat shadowed his eyes, but even so, no one could mistake the way he kept glancing toward the door, waiting for her. His bride, she was the prettiest girl in 3 counties, or so the townsfolk said. With hair like spun gold and a smile that could melt the frost off a morning window, she had been promised to him since spring, and her family made sure everyone knew it was an honor to wed a man so respected, so steadfast. But as the minutes ticked by, whispers turned to uneasy murmurs. The minister cleared his throat more than once, trying to mask the silence that stretched heavy as the night outside. Finally, one of the younger boys burst through the doors, cheeks red from the cold, blurting words that struck like gunfire. She was gone. No note, no explanation, just the sound of hooves disappearing down the road, carrying her into the darkness. Gasps filled the room, and all eyes turned to the groom. Some expected rage, others despair, but he gave them nothing. He stood there like a stone, jaw tight, hands clenched at his sides. Only those who knew him best saw the storm brewing beneath that stillness. A man's pride could take many blows, but not this. Not before God and the whole town. Her family was in shambles. The mother clutching her chest, the father pacing as though he might collapse under the weight of shame. Then came the younger sister, quiet as a shadow, standing just behind the pews with wide eyes fixed on the groom. She had always been the forgotten one, the softer echo of her sister's beauty, more comfortable in the kitchen or with a book than in the center of attention. No one noticed her trembling hands or the way she looked at him, as if torn between fear and something she dared not name. The air in that chapel was thick with judgment. Neighbors whispering about scandal and disgrace. The family would be ruined, folks said. A runaway bride was a mark that would stain their name for years to come. And in that moment, with the whole town watching, the groom made a choice no one saw coming. He did not storm out or ride after the one who left. He turned toward the younger sister. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned when he spoke. He asked her nothing, explained nothing, just declared that the wedding would not be wasted. If one sister had fled, the other would take her place. Gasps rippled through the crowd again. Harsher this time, but no one dared challenge him. The younger sister froze, her breath caught somewhere between protest and surrender. Her mother's hand pressed against her back, urging her forward, perhaps desperate to salvage the family's honor. The minister stammered, uncertain, but the groom's glare silenced him. And so the vows were spoken, though her lips trembled as she repeated them, her voice barely rising above the crackle of the lanterns. By the time the ring slid onto her finger, the snow outside had thickened. Shrouding the town in a quiet no one dared break, the people filed out quickly afterward, their faces pale, their whispers sharp as knives. Some pitied her, others judged him, but all agreed it was a wedding they would never forget. Behind closed doors that night, candles flickered low in the cabin where husband and wife now sat across from one another. The fire popped, but neither spoke. She kept her eyes down, twisting the new ring on her finger, while he studied her in silence, his expression unreadable. The weight of what had happened clung to the walls like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of hooves far beyond the ridge, a reminder that somewhere out there, the runaway bride rode free, leaving behind a trail of questions no one could answer. Why had she fled? Who waited for her in the shadows? And more haunting still, what kind of bond could grow from a marriage born not of love, but of anger, shame, and the desperate need to save face? The younger sister lifted her eyes at last, and for the first time, their gazes locked. There was no kindness in his stare, but neither was there cruelty. It was something harder to name, something that made her shiver even in the warmth of the fire. The The silence between them stretched, thick as the snow outside, and in that moment she knew nothing about her life would ever be the same. The night wore on. But sleep would not come for either of them. He sat by the fire, his mind haunted by betrayal and the sting of humiliation. She lay awake, staring at the rafters, her heart a storm of fear, guilt, and something she dared not confess, even to herself. Morning would bring questions from the town, whispers from neighbors, and a future neither of them had chosen. Yet beneath it all, there lingered a truth both terrifying and undeniable. This was only the beginning. And as the first light of dawn broke over the snow-covered town, the runaway bride was nowhere to be found. And the man who should have been her husband was bound instead to the one she left behind. What that bond would mean, no one yet knew. But deep inside, both of them felt the same unease. As though fate had only just begun to play its cruel hand, the morning after the hasty wedding dawned gray and bitter. The kind of cold that clung to a man's bones no matter how many logs he threw into the fire. The snow had slowed, but the streets of the town still wore a thick white blanket, muffling sound and movement. Smoke rose from chimneys as folks stirred in their homes, but no one forgot what had happened the night before. Behind curtains and shutters, whispers traveled faster than the wind, carrying judgment, pity, and curiosity. Inside the cabin, the younger sister sat at the edge of the narrow bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The ring on her finger felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of her sister's absence and the burden of every eye that had witnessed her vows. She had not slept, though her body ached with exhaustion. Every creak of the floorboards reminded her she was no longer a girl in her father's house, but a wife bound to a man she hardly knew. A man whose silence unsettled her more than anger ever could. He had risen early, before the sun, pulling on his coat and boots without a word. She had watched him from the corner of her eye as he moved with steady purpose, like a man who had long ago learned not to waste motion. His face gave nothing away, and when the door shut behind him, she felt both relief and a hollow ache she couldn't name. He had left her there with only the low fire for company. And though she told herself she ought to be grateful for the peace, her thoughts tangled until she wished for anything but silence. The town was already buzzing by the time he strode down the street. Men tipped their hats stiffly, some out of respect, others out of fear, but no one dared speak the words that lingered on every tongue. He had been left humiliated, and then forced a marriage on a girl who had not been meant for him. Yet he walked with the same unbending strength he always carried, shoulders squared as though he dared anyone to question his decision. That defiance, that pride, was what had kept him alive through winters and losses. And it was the same that now kept him from crumbling under shame. Back at her family's home, the mother wept quietly into her apron, mourning both the daughter who had fled and the one who had been thrust into a life she had not chosen. The father cursed under his breath, pacing the wooden floorboards as though he could wear a path into them. He was a man whose pride had already seen too many blows, and this was one wound he could not mend. Yet he said nothing of chasing the runaway bride, whether it was fear, shame, or something darker that kept him still. No one could be sure. As for the runaway herself, her absence grew heavier with each passing hour. Some said she had ridden toward the next town, where a man with slick words and restless eyes had been seen more than once in her company. Others swore she had gone deeper into the wilderness, following some dream of freedom that only she could understand. No one truly knew, and that mystery gnawed at the edges of every conversation. What had driven her to abandon her wedding night? Love, fear, or something darker that no one dared speak aloud? The younger sister found no comfort in the uncertainty. Each time she thought of her sister, her heart ached with betrayal and worry. Yet beneath that, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps this was the fate meant for her all along. She hated that voice. She pushed it down, burying it beneath duty and the cold reality of her new life. Still, when she sat by the fire, she found herself wondering what he thought of her. If he saw her as nothing more than a replacement, or if, in time, he might look at her and truly see her. When he returned that evening, the room seemed smaller with his presence. He carried the scent of cold air and smoke, his coat dusted with snow. She rose quickly, unsure whether to greet him, to speak, or to remain silent. He set his hat on the table, his movements slow and deliberate, and finally looked at her. His gaze was sharp, but not unkind, and when he spoke, his voice was low, carrying the weight of a man used to being obeyed. "You'll need to learn this place," he said, nodding toward the cabin. "It's yours now, as much as mine. Food, firewood, the animals outside. It won't be easy," she nodded, her hands twisting in her lap again. "I'll do what I can." For a moment, the silence pressed between them once more. Then, almost unexpectedly, he added, "You didn't ask for this, but it's done. Folks will watch us, and they'll judge. Best we give them nothing more to talk about." His words were practical, yet there was something in his tone she could not quite read. Duty, perhaps, or a hint of the storm still raging beneath his calm surface. She wanted to ask him if he missed her sister, if he hated her for standing in her place. But the question stayed trapped in her throat. The days that followed moved slow, each one colder than the last. She busied herself with chores, fetching water from the well, mending clothes, and learning the rhythm of the cabin. He worked long hours outside, chopping wood, tending to livestock, or riding out into the snowy hills. They spoke little, yet the silence between them began to take on new shapes. At times, it felt heavy and suffocating. But at others, it carried a strange comfort, as though words might shatter something fragile neither of them wanted to lose. Still, the shadow of the runaway bride lingered. The town whispered of her daily, speculating on where she had gone and what she might do next. Each time the younger sister heard her name spoken, her chest tightened, so she bore the weight of both guilt and longing. She could not forget the image of her sister's empty place at the altar, nor the way the townsfolk had stared at her when she was pushed forward. That memory clung to her like a ghost, reminding her that she lived in another's shadow, no matter how hard she tried to step into her own light. And the groom, for all his strength, could not shake the sting of betrayal. At night, when he thought she slept, he would sit by the fire, staring into the flames with a darkness in his eyes that made her shiver. Sometimes his hand would tighten around his glass until she thought it might shatter. He spoke little of the past, but she could see it in him. The wound that had not yet begun to heal one night, as the wind howled against the walls and the snow piled high outside, he finally spoke words that cut deeper than silence ever could. "She come back," he said, his voice low and certain. "And when she does, there'll be a reckoning." The younger sister's breath caught, her heart thudding in her chest. She wanted to ask what he meant, what reckoning he imagined, but the look in his eyes kept her silent. In that moment, she realized that the storm was not only outside their door, but inside their lives as well, waiting for the moment to break. And though she said nothing, deep in her heart, she wondered if she feared her sister's return more than her absence. For if the runaway bride came back, the fragile thread that held this new life together might unravel, leaving them all exposed to truths they were not ready to face. Winter settled in hard, as if the land itself wanted to trap secrets beneath the snow. The younger sister grew used to the chill of the cabin and the quiet rhythm of her new life. But there was no shaking the weight of what hung between her and the man she now called husband. Each day she carried out her chores, her hands red from the cold water, her back sore from splitting kindling, but her mind wandered in circles. She could never outrun the thought of the sister who had left her behind with this life, a sister whose shadow stretched across every room, every glance, every silence. The townsfolk spoke often, and though she tried not to listen, their voices carried when she went for supplies or fetched water. Some said the runaway bride had been spotted riding toward the mountains, cloaked against the wind. Others whispered she had gone to join a man who had once drifted through town with promises as slippery as his smile. These stories grew with each telling, twisting like vines until no one could tell truth from gossip. Still, the younger sister could not help but wonder if her sister's flight had been planned all along. Was it really fear that had driven her away, or had her heart been given to someone else before the vows were ever spoken? At night, when the fire burned low, she sometimes caught her husband staring at the door as though expecting it to open. His eyes carried the kind of watchfulness a man keeps for an enemy, not for a ghost. He did not speak of his bride who had fled, but his silence was louder than any confession. Once, she tried to ask him what he thought had become of her, but the sharpness of his reply ended the conversation before it began. "Gone is gone," he said, and his voice was so final that she knew not to press further. Yet gone did not mean forgotten. The tension inside the cabin seemed to grow thicker with each passing day, and though he treated her with a certain fairness, she could not help but feel that she was a placeholder, a woman bound by duty rather than chosen out of desire. Sometimes she wondered if he even saw her for herself at all. But the younger sister was not. It's the only one burdened by questions. In town, men gathered at the saloon, their talk hushed over mugs of whiskey. Some worried that the runaway bride had disgraced not only her family, but the whole community, casting suspicion on everyone who had trusted her. Others feared that she might return with trouble at her heels. The frontier was not a forgiving place, and those who vanished often came back with secrets heavy enough to drag others down. Among these murmurs, another subplot began to stir. A rancher who lived on the far edge of town claimed he had seen horse tracks leading north, deeper into the hills where outlaws sometimes made camp. His words planted seeds of unease. If the bride had run to someone dangerous, her return could bring more than scandal, it could bring bloodshed. The sheriff, a tired man with too many burdens of his own, dismissed the talk at first, but even he began to keep his eyes sharper on the roads leading in and out of town. Back at the cabin, the younger sister felt the tension tightening its hold. Though her husband spoke little, she noticed changes in him. He stayed out longer, riding further than usual. His jaw set in a way that told her he carried more than wood or water back with him. One evening, as she mended a shirt by the fire, she found a slip of folded paper tucked inside his coat. Her hands trembled as she pulled it free, though she knew it was wrong to pry. It was not a letter, but a scrap with a name written on it, a name she did not recognize. She folded it back quickly, guilt burning her cheeks, but the unease remained. Her own heart was not free of conflict either. The more time she spent near him, the more she found herself caught between fear and a strange pull she could not name. He was a hard man, scarred by loss and shaped by pride. But there were moments, small and fleeting, when she saw a softer side. The way he brushed snow from his shoulders before stepping inside, or the careful way he placed wood on the fire so it burned steady through the night. These little glimpses unsettled her more than his anger, for they made her wonder what might lie buried beneath the armor he wore so tightly as winter dragged on. The tension in town mirrored the tension in their home. Supplies ran thin, tempers grew short, and every whisper about the missing bride spread like wildfire. Some began to look at the younger sister differently, not just as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who might have known more than she admitted. Why had she stepped forward so quickly at the wedding? Why had she not protested louder when he claimed her as his wife? Questions like these swirled through the air, feeding suspicion where there had once been sympathy. The weight of those questions pressed on her until she felt trapped not only by her marriage but by the watchful eyes of the whole town. She began to avoid the market, sending him instead, though she knew his presence did little to quiet the rumors. Still, she could not bear the stares, the pitying glances, or the sharp whispers that fell silent the moment she passed by. Meanwhile, the land itself seemed to conspire against them. One night a blizzard swept through, fierce enough to shake the cabin walls. The younger sister lay awake, listening to the wind claw at the roof, when she heard something else, a faint knock, soft but distinct, at the door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She sat up, holding her breath, but when she glanced toward the fire, she saw him already awake, already reaching for his gun. They both froze, listening. The knock did not come again, but the wind carried a sound like hooves retreating into the storm. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness, but the snow was too thick to see anything. For a long time, neither of them spoke. When he finally turned back, his face was unreadable, but the way he kept his gun within reach told her he did not believe it had been her imagination. The days after that felt different. He grew more guarded, more restless, and she found herself watching the door as though expecting it to open at any moment. She could not help but wonder if the knock had been her sister, returning in secret, or someone else entirely. Either way, the thought of what might come next kept her awake long into the nights. The younger sister's conflict deepened as she struggled between loyalty out to her family and the growing pull of her new role as wife. She wanted to hate him for the way he had taken her without asking, yet she found herself seeking his approval, listening for the small shifts in his tone that told her she had pleased him. It was a dangerous line to walk, and she knew it. For if her sister did return, what place would she have left to stand? The town, the family, the husband, and the missing bridal threads of the same knot, tightening with each passing day. Secrets pressed in from all sides, and the air itself seemed to carry a warning that the storm was far from over. The younger sister could feel it in her bones, the sense that they were all being led toward something none of them could yet see, something that would demand answers whether they were ready to give them or not. The snow finally began to loosen its grip on the land, but instead of relief, the thaw seemed to bring a new kind of unrest. Paths that had been buried under white drifts now revealed deep ruts and tracks, proof of travelers who had passed unnoticed during the winter storms. Rumors spread again, louder this time, carrying the name of the runaway bride with them. A trader swore he had seen her in a camp not 2 days' ride north, riding with a man who wasn't her husband. Others whispered that she had been hiding closer than anyone guessed, waiting for the right moment to return. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, and in the cabin it became unbearable. The younger sister tried to keep her mind on her work, but every time the wind rattled, the shutters, or a rider passed along the road, her breath caught in her chest. She had lived through months of quiet dread, but now that spring threatened. It felt as if something was pressing hard against the walls of her life, straining to break through. Her husband was more restless than ever, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. His face grim, his silence deeper than the river. Sometimes she thought she smelled smoke on his coat, as though he had been near a fire that wasn't their own at night. When the fire burned low and shadows crept along the walls, he would sit with his jaw set tight, staring into the flames. She could feel the distance between them, but she could also sense that he carried a plan. The way his hand lingered on his gun belt, the way his eyes tracked every sound outside the cabin, told her he was waiting for something, or someone. Her own heart wavered with confusion. She had begun to know him better, the small habits he never thought to hide. The way his voice softened when he was bone-tired, the rough care he gave the animals when the weather bit too hard. He was not cruel, not to her, yet she could not forget how their marriage had begun, born of shame and anger, not love. She feared him, but more than that. She feared the day her sister might return and force them all to face what none dared say aloud. The town was no calmer. Every corner of the saloon echoed with speculation. The sheriff kept a closer watch on the roads, though he admitted to more than one man that he didn't want to be the one caught in the middle if the runaway bride came back. Some feared scandal. Others feared blood. The family kept their doors shut tight, avoiding the stares of neighbors. And it was said the father had taken to drinking more heavily, his shame eating at him. The mother aged before people's eyes, her hair turning white as she worried over both daughters. It was one evening, when the air was sharp with the smell of thawing earth, that the younger sister overheard something that set her heart racing. She had gone into town for supplies, bracing herself against the usual whispers. When she passed the open door of the blacksmith shop, inside 2 men spoke in hushed but urgent tones, not noticing her presence. "She'll be back soon," one said. "He knows it. That's why he's riding so far out these days." "And when she does?" the other asked. "He won't just let it go. A man like him, pride cut deep. He'll make someone pay." Their words struck her harder than the cold ever had. She carried them back with her, heavier than the sack she held in her hands. That night, she could not stop thinking of what they had said. If her sister returned, would her husband truly take vengeance? And if so, on whom? The days stretched taut with suspense. More tracks were found along the ridges, horse prints that did not belong to any local ranchers. A rider was seen watching the town from the tree line before vanishing into the hills. The whispers grew sharper, and though no one said it plain, everyone felt that something was coming. Inside the cabin, the younger sister's fear turned to a strange kind of strength. She began to watch her husband as closely as he watched the horizon. She studied the way he moved, the way he listened. And she realized he was preparing for a storm not of weather, but of people. She longed to ask him what he would do if her sister appeared at their door, but the words never left her lips. She was afraid of the answer. Then came the night when everything seemed to shift. The moon was bright, casting silver over the snow-patched earth, and the wind was still. The younger sister woke to the sound of horses, more than one, moving steady and slow along the road. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw her husband already pulling on his coat, gun in hand. He didn't speak to her, didn't need to. His eyes told her all she needed to know. She crept to the window, her breath fogging the glass. In the distance, she saw figures, cloaked riders moving like shadows under the moonlight. Her stomach twisted as one of them lifted her head, and she caught a glimpse of hair that gleamed pale even in the dark. Her sister. The sight made her knees weak, and she pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. She wanted to call out, to fling open the door and run to her, but the look on her husband's face stopped her cold. He had the expression of a man who had been waiting for this moment, a man ready to act. The riders paused at the edge of the trees, their shapes still and watchful. The silence stretched until the night itself seemed to hold its breath. She felt her own breath trapped in her chest, the ring on her finger cutting into her skin as she clenched her hand tight. Her sister was here. The man she had ridden with was here, and her husband was ready to confront them both. The air grew thick, heavy with everything unsaid. The younger sister's heart raced, torn between loyalty, fear, and something deeper she could not untangle. She could sense that the moment before them would change everything. The family's honor, the town's whispers, the bond between sisters, and the pride of the man who stood with a gun in his hand, all of it was about to collide. The riders moved closer, hooves crunching slow over the thawing ground. The younger sister felt the walls of the cabin close in around her. She could not tell if she wanted her sister to step through the door or vanish forever into the night. She could only feel the storm building, pressing harder, waiting to break, and in that moment, with the world balanced on the edge of a blade, the younger sister realized something terrifying. No matter what happened when those riders reached their door, there would be no way back. Whatever choice was made, whatever words were spoken, they would carry the weight of it for the rest of their lives. The knock came again. Louder this time, not soft as before, but heavy, certain. Her husband stepped forward, his hand firm on the door. She held her breath, heart pounding, knowing the moment had finally come. The door creaked open under his steady hand, the lantern light spilling out into the cold night. The younger sister stood frozen by the fire, her hands clutched tightly together as the riders shifted in the glow. The first to step forward was the runaway bride, her face pale, her hair tangled by wind and dust, her eyes carrying both defiance and something broken beneath it. Behind her, a man leaned on his horse, sharped. With a smirk that told of trouble even before he opened his mouth, the silence stretched, heavy as iron. The husband did not lower his gun, but he did not fire either. His jaw tightened, and his gaze never left the sister who had abandoned him. The younger sister's breath came shallow, torn between relief that her sibling was alive and fear of what her return meant. The runaway bride finally spoke, her voice trembling but laced with pride. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't marry you. My heart was already gone to him." She glanced back at the man who stood behind her, his hand resting easy on his belt, his grin daring anyone to challenge him. "I left because I had to choose for myself." The words struck like stones, echoing in the cabin. The husband's grip on his gun did not falter, but his silence carried more weight than any outburst. The younger sister's throat tightened as she watched. The man she had been forced to marry stare at the woman who had humiliated him before the whole town. For a moment, she thought blood would spill then and there, but instead, he lowered the gun slowly and stepped aside. "You made your choice," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Then live with it. Don't come back here expecting forgiveness or a welcome." The runaway bride flinched at the words. Oh. And though she tried to stand tall, The mask of defiance cracked at the edges. The man beside her pulled her closer, smirking as if victory was his. But even he shifted uneasily under the weight of the husband's stare. Without another word, they turned, the sound of their horses fading into the night until only silence remained. Inside, the younger sister's heart ached. She wanted to run after her sibling, to hold her hand and beg her to stay, but her feet would not move. Her sister had chosen her path, and there was no undoing it. The ache of betrayal and the sting of love lost would linger, but the truth stood clear. The runaway bride had left not because of fear alone, but because her heart had already been given away. The husband closed the door, the latch clicking firmly into place. He stood still for a long moment, then set his gun on the table. The fire crackled in the silence, and the younger sister felt tears sting her eyes, though she did not let them fall. He turned at last, his gaze meeting hers, and for the first time since their wedding, his eyes softened just enough for her to see past the anger. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly, "but you've borne it better than most would." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she replied, "I only tried to do what was right." His shoulders eased, just a fraction, and though no smile touched his lips, the sharpness in his face gentled. He poured water into a tin cup, handed it to her, and sat down by the fire. She joined him, her hands trembling as she took the cup, and in that small, quiet act, something shifted. It was not love, not yet, but it was a start of recognition that they were no longer strangers bound by shame. But to people who had endured something no one else could truly understand, in the days that followed, word spread quickly. The runaway bride had left for good, riding with the man she had chosen. And though tongues wagged and stories grew wild, the scandal began to fade. The family mourned her loss, though they learned to keep their grief behind closed doors. The father walked with his head lower, the mother with her eyes shadowed, but they clung to the daughter who remained, knowing she had saved them from deeper disgrace. The younger sister, now a wife in truth, carried herself differently. She learned the rhythm of her home, the weight of responsibility, and slowly the town's stares softened. Some pitied her, some respected her, but over time the whispers died down. Her husband, though still a man of few words, began to let her in. He showed her how to ride further, how to mend fences, how to read the signs of the land. He did not speak of the bride who had fled, nor of the hurt that lingered, but in the silence between them grew a trust that steadied like roots beneath the soil. Still, in the quiet moments, the younger sister thought of her sibling. She wondered if she was happy, if she regretted the choice she had made, or if she even thought of the home she had left behind. The questions lingered like shadows, but she learned to live with them. Some stories never find neat endings, and some wounds never fully heal. But life pushes forward all the same. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came new work, new challenges, and small joys that stitched the days together. The younger sister found herself humming as she worked, her hands sure where they had once trembled. She began to see her husband not just as the man who had chosen her in anger, but as the man who stood beside her in labor and hardship, the man who never let the weight of silence break her spirit. Their bond was built slowly, piece by piece, until it became something stronger than either of them had expected. The runaway bride's story became a caution in town, spoken of less with outrage and more with weary acceptance. Folks said she had followed her heart, though some wondered if her heart would lead her to ruin. The younger sister knew she might never see her again, but she carried her in memory not with bitterness, but with the quiet understanding that every soul must walk its own path, no matter the cost. In the end, the cabin became more than a shelter from storms. It became a home filled with the soft murmur of daily life, the steady rhythm of two people learning to share their burdens. The pain of betrayal did not vanish, but it no longer ruled them. What had begun in shame and anger grew into something else, something earned through endurance and quiet strength. Looking back, the younger sister understood the truth she had not seen on that fateful wedding night. Life does not always give the choices we long for, but it does give chances to rise above them. Her story was not the one she had dreamed of as a girl, but it was hers, and she lived it with a heart that had grown braver than she ever thought it could be. The runaway bride had written her own tale, one of passion and rebellion. But the sister who stayed behind discovered a different kind of courage, the kind found in facing hardship, in standing firm when the world judged, and in finding hope where none seemed possible. Both paths held sorrow, both carried risk, but only time would tell which held the greater reward. And so the story closed not with grand declarations, but with quiet resilience. A cabin lit by firelight, a woman who had once been overlooked now standing strong, and a man once consumed by pride learning to share his silence with another soul. The town moved on, the seasons turned, and the scandal that once seemed so sharp dulled into memory. But for those who lived it, the lessons endured. That honor can be lost and found again, that love can grow where least expected, and that even the deepest betrayal can give way to a new beginning. The younger sister, once a shadow in her sibling's light, now walked her own path, steady and sure, her story no longer borrowed, but her own.